At the UN Oceans Conference, I listened to a famous Australian billionaire make a bold claim. If we turn 30% of the world's ocean into marine protected areas, we can fix the oceans. That sparked my interest, because it sounds achievable. But it also left me with more questions than answers. I didn't even really know what marine protected areas were. So I got on a call with Dr. Fabio Favoretto, an internationally renowned scientist who has dedicated his career to researching these protected zones. What I thought would be an academic discussion turned into one of the most entertaining and eye-opening conversations I've had. Fabio paints vivid pictures with his words of healthy oceans, where the sun goes dark from massive schools of tuna, and of devastated seas that have become underwater deserts. He explains what marine protected areas really are, why they are so controversial, and the surprising obstacles we face in establishing them.
Most of the marine protected areas in Europe allows the most destructive fishing activities inside the marine protected area.
But most importantly, this conversation gave me something I wasn't expecting: hope. This is where the ocean meets Dr. Fabio Favoretto.
Where the ocean meets.
Hi Fabio, it's great to have you here today.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm super excited for the conversation because obviously I have a very experienced scuba diver here, scientist, and you're doing so many interesting things. So I would say let's not lose a lot of time and jump right in. And I read that you logged more than 4,000 dives around the world already. Can you tell me about your most spectacular one? Maybe that dive that old Fabio will be telling his grandkids about from his rocking chair.
Yeah, I have one ready, and it's in Revillagigedo archipelago. So it's not one dive site, but it's the whole archipelago. It's the most incredible place I've ever been. It's like lost in the Pacific. It's kind of like Galapagos, but they call it the Galapagos of Mexico, but it's not like the Galapagos. And you can basically see everything. If you have a list of species that you want to see in one dive, it's a good chance that you halve the list in one dive. It's amazing. And then you really feel that you're out of this world because you have these volcans in the middle of nothing. Beautiful place. That's one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. And what is your favorite fish to see when you're underwater?
Wow, that's tough. If I have to pick, um, one of the most incredible and unexpected experiences, because of course, like, there's the classic one, sharks, mantas, that are amazing. Dolphins are incredible. But the one that was most unexpected for me and it still give me chills is the tuna. They was in Revillagigedo, and sometimes you get these huge schools of massive yellowfin tunas, and you don't expect how big a full grown tuna is. And underwater it looks larger than a shark, and it's huge. And I remember that I was diving and I was looking into the blue because there was like some Galapagos sharks, and basically the sun darkened, right? Everything went, and I thought it was a cloud. And then I just started looking at the other side, and I could feel the movement of the water because thousands of tuna were like just going. I don't know how fast, but you could see like like basically Formula One cars, and you could see the vibration of the water on the face by looking at them. And it was like probably 3-4 meters from this river of tuna. It was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, for sure.
That sounds insane. And I mean, the precursor or I think when you first got into diving was when you were 14 years old. And back then, when I read that right, you wanted to become an astrophysicist. What was it that fascinated you about
Physics.
physics?
Physics made me change my mind. But because I wanted to do astrophysics. Because I like stars and planets. But yeah, I think I realized quickly that it was not for me and not that smart, definitely. But then I started diving, um, and it might sound a cliche, but breathing underwater was like, wow, was very cool. And at first it didn't grow a marine ecology interest in me a lot, but I really liked diving. And I started diving a lot, and I started having questions about why, for example, you can see stuff just in the first meters, and why then you see corals, but just sometimes after 20 meters only. For example, the Mediterranean Sea is very clear. You have like Posidonia plants in shallow waters, and then you go deeper, you have the coralligenous community with fan corals and the red corals. And so then I understood that it was because of the light, and that mesmerized me, because I say, wow, just because of the light that is penetrating in the water column, it affects in an entire ecosystem. And so that was really triggering me in interesting in ecology, right? Because you could either be a biologist or ecologist, but technically I work in ecology because I like the connection between organisms more than study one single organism. Right? I like to study the ecosystem, right? And why they stay there, why they're there, what happens if they move, right? If they disappear.
It's so interesting that so many people that are interested in the oceans are also interested in space, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
And I, for myself, am very happy that you went into the oceans because I think they deserve more attention than space. But that's my take. And you mentioned you grew up by the Mediterranean Sea, right? And I think it's one of those places on Earth that is already quite degraded. And we just heard your anecdote from diving in Mexico, full of life,
Yeah.
tuna swarms as big as sharks, basically. What does the world look like when it's not working? How does a degraded ocean look like?
Yeah, so I think that the aspect of the Mediterranean Sea, its degradation, is probably the main reason why I shifted my attitude. Before, I was like concerned or more passive in studying the environment, but then when you understand the level of degradation on the Mediterranean Sea, you get angry. At least I got angry because I started diving in the Mediterranean Sea. And I used to work every summer as a diving guide because it was very expensive, right? So I was working at diving, and I always hated people coming from the Red Sea or the Maldives and say, "Oh, the Mediterranean sucks," right? And they would say, "You see nothing. Oh, you see two nudibranchs," right? And I still love the Mediterranean Sea, even if I went to Revillagigedo and other places. I loved it because it's beautiful. But then you understand, because before you think that it's like it's a traumatized child, like it is because it is like this, so everyone picks on the Mediterranean, but it because it was born this way. But when you understand, and that when I started studying, that it used to be like Mexico or even more, you get angry because you said that was stolen from me. I could have dove with mantas, white sharks, turtles, seals, everything that I've dove in other places, thousands of miles from my home. I could have dove in the Mediterranean Sea, the places that I love, that I call home, and I cannot anymore. So that was stolen from me in a way. And not even for food, right? Because they didn't kill all the sharks because of food. They killed all the sharks for other things, right? So I guess that
Why did they kill the sharks if not for food?
because they thought it was dangerous. So most of it's many reasons.
Yeah.
First, the shark meat is not that good. That's why most of the market is very limited. Right now, actually, the Mediterranean Sea, Italy is a big market for shark meat. but it's because we don't have anything else anymore. And shark meat is very cheap. And so before it was, you had other stuff. You have like big groupers that are much tastier, or jacks or other fish that are much better. And it is the meat is much tender and savory. Or the marlin, right? But when you go with the sharks, because already you have depleted everything else, and you start killing all the sharks, and they saw that as a competitors, like dolphins, they were killing dolphins. Was normal to kill dolphins because they were not helping the fishing communities, so they were killing all the dolphins, they're killing all the sharks, but now also it's bycatch, so they are killing them because they get into the net, they get entangled, or simply the population is going down because they don't have anything to eat, literally. And so there is many reasons why the shark are getting hit from all over the place and from many things. And since it's the only thing that is getting caught, sometimes you think you're eating tuna sometimes, but it's really sharks.
Really?
Oh yeah.
That's crazy. And I mean, what you're describing is basically the biodiversity going away. Mediterranean used to be way more healthy. And
Yep.
I read a quote from you that made me ponder, at least. You said that your greatest fear isn't that the sea dies, but the world gets used to living without it. And to some degree, I think in Europe, we got used to the Mediterranean as it is. Is this what you mean by it, or what's behind that quote?
No, yes, because so there is a concept related to what I was saying that I got angry about thinking the Mediterranean was this way. So everybody was picking to and was making joke about the Mediterranean. It was not the Mediterranean fault, right? But it's actually a victim of what we did to the Mediterranean Sea, and we get used to it, and we call this. There is actually a concept in ecology that we call it shifted baseline. So everything is relative. You can have ecosystem with few species, say the desert, right? And it's perfectly fine. That's the condition that are natural for the desert. And then you have the Amazon, right, with thousands of species. And this is cool. It's not that one is better than the other. So you could argue, right, that the status of the Mediterranean is normal, but it's not, because if you compare it, right, to thousands of years ago, it was completely different. And places like Mexico are like this because the baseline is closer to us, because they were exploited thousands of years less time than ours. But even in Mexico, if you go to the Gulf of California, for example, where I've been diving and working the most, the people from back 2 or 3 generations, they will tell you the most incredible stories that you could basically walk on turtle shells because there were so much whales all over the place, and sharks all over the place. And now it's not like that. Revillagigedo is one of the few places left in Mexico where you can see tunas like that, sharks like that, because it's protected, and it's fully protected. Because one of the things that we believe is that marine protected areas are protecting, while only 3% of them are really excluding extractive and destructive activities. And so
Interesting. So basically, going to the Pacific is almost like jumping into a time machine, traveling back. To some degree, it's sad, but also it can be an inspiration for hope. Things can be better.
And actually, I'm saying this, but this was there is an awesome book that is called The Unnatural History of the Sea by Callum Roberts. That was one of the first that opened my eyes about that. But then there was one of the researchers that started this, Jeremy Jackson, for example, from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. They started to ask what's normal, right, in the ocean, because they already knew that the impact didn't start today. They're not today. They started in the Industrial Revolution, and in the Mediterranean Sea, even the Romans, right, were fishing and killing stuff, not on industrial scales, right, but yeah, they were still impacting. So what was normal, it's fundamental in ecology. Because one thing that we all get wrong is that we think, oh, the ocean is dying. The ocean is not dying. The ocean will never die, or the nature will never die unless another protoplanet is gonna destroy her, right? Or the sun is gonna eat us all. But we, even with the nuclear, we cannot wipe out life. We're gonna wipe out ourselves. That's probably. But nature, we don't have that power to kill it. We are the one that are paying the price, but we are not realizing it. And I'm going back to the point where we are losing so much contact with nature, and we have so much of the consequences in our health, in our mind health, not only the physical one, but also our psychological part is very affected by the detachment of nature, in the stress, in everything, in many illnesses. And you think about it, in our freedom, you see, for example, I think one of the examples is COVID, was perfect example, because I thought, look how quickly we could get accustomed to a very weird situation, like having the mask or having to stay at home, right? Many things that were like very, very weird, right? And so it was this realization that I don't know if you saw Blade Runner, the new movie, right? The second one, but there is like this first scene where he arrives and there is California, but it's like a desert and it's dark with dust and this weird cultivation. And this is probably the future that we're gonna have, but my kids will think that that's normal because it's the only thing that they know. And if we don't bring up those baselines, they think that that's normal.
No, I think this baseline is so interesting as a concept, and humans are so adaptable, right? This is why we can fit into so many areas, and at the same time we're very bad at recalling the past also to some degree. This recency bias almost, that accepting these things as normal is pretty wrong. But I think we can agree that the oceans today are in a way worse situation than they were even 10 years ago, 20 years, 50 years ago. And I want to touch on a topic that will give us hope, but first I need to zoom in once more into a bit the pain that we're seeing. Over your 4,000 dives, you probably have seen also some shocking areas of degradation. What is the one thing that comes to your mind of a perfect example of how things should not be?
Well, probably places where there's been eutrophication is one of the worst things that you can look at. It's a process that occurs near rivers. For example, one dead zone that is very famous is in the Gulf of Mexico. Or basically picture any big river delta, and you're gonna have a dead zone, almost for sure. Because we have been polluting the rivers with fertilizers, especially phosphate, for example, for our own cultivation. And then rains, right, takes from the fields for the crops all that phosphate into the rivers, and then the rivers get it back to the oceans. When it gets to the ocean, the phosphate triggers a bloom of algae, because the algae are super happy. We're actually doing them a favor, so they're cool. But they grow so much that then they start to die, and because they're like exploding, so they're parting and they're hungover and they start to decompose. And when they start to decompose, they consume oxygen. So when they deplete the oxygen so much that it becomes a dead zone and nothing can live there anymore. And it can happen for once, that it could be something that like one time happening, or it could be chronic, like in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, where there is so much runoff that now it's it's a dead zone. It's very hard to recover from that because it's like a destroyed, imbalancing system. And so what you see there is basically a desert of either sand and rock and nothing more.
Nothing is alive anymore.
Yeah, well, it is bacteria and stuff, nothing that you get excited. Yeah.
And another big issue, at least on the media, is the topic of overfishing, right? And I think not even just on the media. If we look at the numbers, 90% of large fish gone from the planet. And I know that this is also something that you looked at in your own research. And I mean, there are regulations in place, right? There's quotas, there's seasonal closures and all that. Why do these policies fail to actually restore ocean health or fish health?
That's a great question. Well, when these are, it's not about the regulation that have something wrong. It's because sometimes we put regulation on what we call a top-down approach. So, for example, we implement a marine protected area near a community when there were artisanal fishermen and they don't have really another option. And so we said, we put a marine protected area there, which is the least political cost because we don't care sometimes about the local community. And so, we do it. And we, as politicians, we just put the pin that we did something cool. But then everything falls apart because if you don't have the support of the community, you don't have anything. And so it's the first mistakes were that we thought we could implement regulation without considering humans into the equation, right? So it's very different, for example, to put fishing quotas and other stuff because that's a relatively different context. But in the context of marine protected area, that's the main issue because you have most of the time people living or interacting with that environment. So if you don't have them on your side, even if you put the marine protected area, nothing is going to work. For fishery ecology, I will say that there are many examples where you could recover a stock in artisanal contexts where you can have a balance, yes, but nothing that is industrial, for example, is possible to be sustainable, at least in my opinion, and there are many other researchers that share that opinion. And so we exclude that everything that is really, really massive is impossible. But if there are contexts where that works, but are very small contexts where we were able to work with the communities. And it's not because the communities or the fishermen is bad, but because it's a tragedy of the common, right? We call that in economy is the tragedy of people that are destroying their own resources because they don't see any other option. And I get that. When you go speak with artisanal fishermen, they're exactly like you and I and everybody else, and they are the first one that understand that's a problem. No. But what are the alternatives? What are the help? What are the real understanding of the meaning of those regulations is something that we're not most of the time bringing to the fishermen. So that's a social problem. I will say that we have all the tools, we have most of the science, but we lack the change in the mindset of, I would say, 90% of the population.
And you mentioned a very crucial tool in that toolbox, right? Which is the MPAs, the so-called marine protected areas. What is that exactly?
So marine protected areas by definition is an area-based solution, meaning that it has a well-defined geographical area, usually by a polygon. And inside, by government declaration, so a president of a nation says that's protected. It could be a park, national park, right? Like we have on land. It could be a regional park or regional conservation measure, but that prohibits certain activity. However, not all the MPAs are equal. there are MPAs that are fully protected, meaning that you cannot do almost anything. So you can go dive for scientific purposes, but it's are closed. Some are open also to tourism, like very well regulated. But then there are all the other ones that are we call mixed use or minimally protected areas, where you actually, most of them also allow mining or even trawling. Most of the marine protected areas in Europe allows the most destructive fishing activities there are inside the marine protected area.
That is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Why do these areas deserve the term protected? If there's
That's a big debate. That's a big debate that we brought it, but it has been a combination of good intention that were twisted, and also a lot of greenwashing, right? Of course, saying that, oh yeah, we can. It's like I don't know, green gasoline, right? It's like what?
sustainable
but-
aviation fuel.
Exactly, right? But they say that in the commercial, if you look at that, right? But from marine protected area was about the same. Many awesome movement for conservation made so much work, and right now of all the ocean, we have just 8% of the ocean that is covered by a marine protected area. But that includes the one with trawling inside. So if you exclude the ones that are not, so only the ones that are really protected, you drop to 3%. And so that's something that also gets me angry, because you think every time that we want to protect the ocean, it seems that it's already almost everything is difficult to get. But no, it's like we can do almost whatever we want with 97% of the ocean. So what are we talking about? We are really fighting about the 3%? It's crazy.
It is insane.
And
and especially like I learned the term so-called no-take zone, where you're not allowed to fish at all, right? And this is basically these 3%. And in the beginning of the conversation, when we talked about the sharks in the Mediterranean Sea, you mentioned something that sounded my inner alarm bells when you said that humans basically killed the shark because we saw them as competitors on the feedstock. So even back then, we were worried about where are we getting our nutrition from and who's attacking that. And I think when looking at the failing of MPAs or marine protected areas, obviously the first party that we need to look at is in the end the fishing industry, who claims that if suddenly so much of their fishing ground is taken away, they can't do their work anymore, right? Or what are their concerns exactly?
I think it's, I'm gonna sound very millennial this contest, but so in the past, you could actually, and go check it. I think you can find it in YouTube. I saw it once, but if you look, one of the first documentaries from Cousteau, right? So Cousteau, an institution of marine conservation, and you could see on the old one that I think was from the 50s, 70s, something around that, but I'm not sure. But very old one. There are scenes where they kill sharks for fun, and they comment and they say, "Oh yeah, these are shark infested waters, and we have to kill them." It's kind of like saying in Italy and Europe, where they were destroying our meadows because there were malaria, right? So it's kind of like of a trade-off that will make sense, like maybe for malaria, but maybe there will be more sophisticated parts. But at the time, they didn't know. So the change of the mindset in just 2-3 generations, it's incredible. It's like a complete switch to our generation, millennials, right? So saying that it's like a radical, completely different conception to nature. and we are really the first generation that are bringing, and now the other ones are gonna inherit it. But we are the first one that are really bringing the big heavy stuff, right? And I think that is then translates to the attitude of what we have to differentiate when we talk about extractive economy: the people and the industry. So the fishermen are doing their job. There's nothing wrong about being a fisherman, and there is nothing wrong about extracting or making your own living. But then there is the 1% that lobbies and create, and is very powerful, and create harmful industries with harmful subsidies from governments that are not making the best of people, or these subsidies are not helping the fishermen, and just helping the 1% that are very few companies that owns most of the industrial fleets and are depleting oceans all over the world. You can have Spain flagged fish fleets, right, of fishing vessels that operate in the South Pacific with a crew that is from Thailand, or let's say something from Asia, that are slaves, literal slaves. But is not, if you want to track that from that vessel to Spain, is very hard. But it's a very twisted industry that needs to change, needs reform. And the unfortunate narrative is that many people believes, and there are some that actually argue about that we need that for our own survival. But it's not true. We need fisheries, but not industrial one. That one is killing us, and it's killing people in Africa, and it's killing people in South America, and it's killing in Asia, Europe, all over the place, that are the industrial fishermen. They are the ones that are paying the biggest price, because they are the ones that are losing their livelihoods.
No.
And we need the fish from them, not from an industrial destructive activity like the ones that are like these huge trawlers and these huge boats that have helicopters, right? You always think about an old man with his cane. No, that's not fishing anymore. Now it's have more technology than we do sometimes.
And you dedicated a good chunk of your scientific career to actually prove that marine protected areas are not causing harm to the fishing industry. And you do that, and I will probably butcher the name, in Revillagigedo.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah.
Islands, or an archipelago in front of Mexico, the size of South Korea, I read.
Yeah.
Tell me, when you first went there, what did you see that excited you about that area? Was it already a marine protected area back then?
Well, yes. When I went the first time, it was already, but it's a recent protected area. It was declared in 2017. And so all the what I told you about the tuna and all the encounters was there in the Revillagigedo. So it's my favorite spot, literally. And that because it was so remote that it was difficult to exploit by industrial fisheries, but they were exploiting it a lot. And so luckily there is an initiative that I'm particularly fan of, that spawned from this idea of Jeremy Jackson of these baselines that is called Pristine Seas from National Geographic, and it's led by Enrique Sana. And this is an awesome initiative that started by searching the places, like you said, where are the most pristine places that we can use as baseline, because that's like going back in time. And so they made this amazing expedition all over the place. And then not only they were documenting like the biodiversity, but they were also working with the governments to show and say, look, you have this treasure, you should protect it. And I think that probably is one of the most successful organization in conservation of the history, I would say, because they made so many protected areas, so tangible results. And one of that was Reviaje Hello in collaboration with another collaborator of mine. It's called Octavio Burto, who was my PI in Strix. And they were able to implement and push for the implementation of this protected area. And it was a great success because it was such a great area, but it was no take. So it was not like a paper park, that we call it, right? Where it's a marine protected area, but you can really still fish. No, it's like no fishing.
So it's basically a national park for fish and fish only, or marine and
Correct.
only, and maybe a few scientific divers. But
Yes, but you can also visit it. There are liveaboards where you can go. You don't stay on the islands, you stay on the boat, and then you go back, and it's like 10 days cruise, and it's an amazing experience. And then there are some people living on the island, but they are military personnel that basically maintain sovereignty of the islands, and checks, of course, as like patrolling. But the area is so big that like it's almost impossible to check.
yeah,
When I started working there is because we wanted to use technologies to help them look at potential illegal fishing, because everybody was saying there is going to be so much illegal fishing because it's too big, right? And probably I was saying the same thing. So we started using satellites to see if industrial fishermen were actually going there. And we saw that they didn't. It was very surprising. And there are two reasons for this. One is because it's not worthy for them to go there anymore, because they have the other 90% of the ocean. So even if they fought for that, they have other places to go, right? But that's not even the only thing, because there will be fishing displacement, right? If you protect an area, to have them fish in another one doesn't really make sense. But actually, you can see that most of the fleets, and this occurs not only for Mexico, but globally, they're going further and further away from the coast, because they are depleting everything near the coast where it's cheaper, right? And then you start going further and further away, where you know that there is a bounty, but yeah, it's more expensive to go there. And I was surprised when I saw the first tracks of the fishing vessels from Mexico. They were going from the mainland to the middle of the Pacific to fish, and they will stay there almost 1 year out at sea, and then they will go back. So you can imagine the catch, right, of 1 year of full fishing in the Pacific.
it also sounds like such a horrible life. Like, honestly.
Also, yes, very tough job. I mean, it's very tough. Yeah.
So it's not, as you said, on the fishermen per se, right? But on the companies sometimes also behind it. And I saw the new David Attenborough movie Ocean, and there's this other marine protected area, I think, close to Hawaii, and they spectacular images, right, of how life rebounds. Can you take me through the process of what happens when you leave an ecosystem alone in the ocean? What happens? Why is the ocean so fast in recovery?
This is another great question. It's not all fast. It depends on how much was degraded in the first place. But if you're lucky that there are the foundational species, because again, it's like in society, all people are equal, but some are more equal than others, right? So it's like you have some species that are a bit more relevant, say for example corals, right? We call that foundational species because they're like a tree. The only physical three-dimensional presence of that brings niche and space for other species to associate. And so if you have a healthy foundational environment, say that you don't have pollution or you don't have other pressures, if you remove fishing, life starts thriving again, because it's generation-wise, you can recover biomass very fast. With sharks, however, it takes more time sometimes. because you have to accumulate that biomass. There are some groupers, for example, they live 60, 70 years. So you can imagine the impact that we did in killing all these animals that were aging, right? Because they were the biggest one. And so we need to wait for them to regrow and get old, right? So that's also why sometimes some fishing regulations are not working, because we want the big guys. And sometimes you have to leave some big guys for the ecosystem to work. And so this is called the atrophic cascade, right? The fishing down the food webs. You go and start fishing the big ones, and then you start fishing the smaller ones up. You start fishing jellyfish. For example, now in the Mediterranean Sea, they start commercializing jellyfish and algae, right? Instead of other stuff. So if we remove the fishing pressure from the bottom up, it starts recovering. And for example, we have many examples of this in Medes Island, in the Mediterranean, but also in Mexico, for example. Cabo Pulmo is a great example. It was a fishing village that fished everything that they could fish, and then they stopped. And in a span of 10 years, mostly, the biomass exploded. And now sharks got back. One cool thing, within 10 years, everything changed. It was unbelievable. If we weren't documented, nobody would have believed. And there is still people that saying, for example, that I argue with them, but there are other protected areas in the Gulf of California nearby Cabo Pulmo, and but these other areas are not fully protected. They're not no-take. Cabo Pulmo, the secret is that it's no-take, and so they allowed the ecosystem to recover. The other ones didn't recover because they are still open to fishing. But there are some that are arguing and say, no, but Cabo Pulmo is special. No, there is nothing special about it. There are other places that I will protect that probably would be 10 times Cabo Pulmo, but we can't because of people like wanted to exploit those places.
Well, interesting. And can you explain part of, or the reason of your study was basically to prove that if these marine protected areas are in place, fisheries don't suffer from it, right? What came out of that study? What did you observe?
Yeah, because one thing is that they have a lot of available space, industrial ones. This is very important because my study in Revillagigedo was special because Revillagigedo is special. It's very isolated. It doesn't have a population living on the island, which is critical. Because an example, for example, like the Galapagos, is not the same because there is people living and fishing in the Galapagos, right? But so that people cannot be displaced. What are they going to do with Icelanders? They cannot fish anymore. What are they going to do? They're going to starve. Yeah. So Revillagigedo was a perfect example because we removed all the noise and we saw that the industrial ones, that again are 90% of our problems, have a lot of fishing grounds that they can go and exploit. And also, they are still fishing, but in areas where probably there is spillover. And there is another studies from other researchers that actually followed up on our study and collected our data from other marine protected areas that demonstrated that these large protected areas are actually generating this spillover effect, which is when you basically keep your money in the bank, right? These are going to generate interests. And it's the same thing with marine protected areas. You protect them, and they're going to generate a lot of biomass, and these biomass are going to reach carrying capacity. Then it's going to spill over outside the border, so you can fish. And this is also the
border from the marine protected area, but it is fish. They grew up in that sanctuary of a marine protected area, and they make the mistake of swimming over the border, basically.
Yes.
Is an argument that fisheries now buy into, that they say is like, hey, wait, if I actually leave certain parts of the ocean alone, this is producing fish that I can take in a more safe and maybe more sustainable, if we can even say that in this context, in a more sustainable way.
Yes, most of them. Most of the fishermen will say that. Most of the fishermen probably will understand their own fishing ground better than me and better than anybody else. But why they don't do it? Uh, the the problem is political. Is not anything else really. It's about political will, because they themselves, they're not going to say I have to risk it all. In Cabo Pulmo they did it, and it was tough. If you go to Cabo Pulmo, the fishermen that they decided to not fish, imagine that decision. For 10 years they had to have faith to the scientists telling them, no, if you protect it, they're gonna go back. But then imagine the pressure, right? Seeing your kids, and maybe you say, and of course, money is not coming in, food is not coming in. So what are we going to do? And then he had them. Sorry.
Do you know what they did do with the specifically with the more artisanal fishermen? Right, it's like what happened to the livelihoods?
Well, in Cabo Pulmo there are still fishermen fishing outside. It's not a big area. Cabo Pulmo is, if you look in the map, it's not Revillagigedo. It's like very big. It's relatively small, which is a testament to the power of nature and the oceans. But then also many converted to tourism, and of course now Cabo Pulmo is one of the most looked upon diving sites in the world, and so they make good money and good living with diving and ecotourism. I don't think that this is the solution, because it's not that everybody can become tourism operators. It's impossible. But again, what I meant by saying is that it's political, because if you go with the fishermen, their right is saying we want to maintain our livelihood. But the problem is political, because we don't give alternatives, we don't give aid, and there is never money for that, while we spend a lot of money for other things. So, for example, you can go to conferences, and there is a lot of saying, oh, we are going to invest 20 million, $200 million into marine conservation. That's awesome. It's a lot of money, right? But then the day after is like, we're going to put $2 trillion into ocean mining, right? So that's the truth. That's simply the truth of the things, is that there is no political will in protecting the ocean, because there are very big interests. With climate change, there is investment in climate change that are dwarfed by the investment that we are putting into the exploration of the Arctic for new mining opportunities, new fishing opportunities. So again, it's where the money goes. And if we were really to be interested in conservation, we will solve it tomorrow. By
The interesting aspect about these marine protected areas, right, is that they can be a huge lever in the fight against climate change, because you mentioned how quickly biomass is building up,
Yeah.
which basically is pure carbon, or not pure, but a big amount of it is then also binding carbon, right? And we need a healthy ocean to regulate our climate as well. So we're basically cutting off our arm.
yes,
We need to actually fight climate change. That's so stupid.
everything that I mean, again, it's not our fault, and all we have, I also am hypocrite, and all have its own.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everybody
there has
also, right? It's like this conversation would not be possible without probably oil involved, like there's plastic involved, and etc. But
exactly. But the point is how we identify these problems, and we realize also that there are the solutions. Because also, for example, in the green energy field, when you say that some renewables are not profitable, it's because you're comparing a subsidized industry against a not subsidized one. Again, if you with fisheries, industrial fisheries will not be profitable without subsidies. If you take out the subsidies, all fishing will stop tomorrow because it's not profitable. So what we are doing with our own tax paying money, that we are subsidizing our own destruction. And the problem is political because we don't know it. And so we are not lobbying or pressuring our representative either in the European Union or through NGOs or through our own activism to make better decisions. Because again, I don't believe that there is like just evil people trying to serve, but there are greedy people and people just looking at an economic mindset. And that economic mindset is the one that we need to change, because as you said, we are investing in our own destruction, while we should invest in our own prosperity when we align what we need, but also what we really want. I don't want to live in the future that is probably gonna have heat waves all the summer, that we're gonna have a desert ocean, and I'm gonna have probably a stressful life because I have to live inside the house all the time. It's bad. Even if I have all the money in the world, what are we doing? Yeah.
And I think that there are movements, right? Like the 30 by 30 or 30 by 2030. Can you say something about that?
Yeah. So when I said, for example, that we protected or 8%, right, is because we had the Aichi target that was for this convention on biodiversity, where politicians, decision makers, scientists basically try to say we should get this target or we screw up, right? And it's kind of like the global summits that now are becoming more and more a joke, but about climate change, right? Where we said we cannot go more than 1.5, right? Something. For the biodiversity, was these targets of saying we should protect 10%, and it was scheduled to 2020. We didn't reach that. We are at 8%. So we kind of double down, saying by 2030 we should protect 30 because it sounds cool, right? But also because there were studies that at least 30% guarantees that part of the ocean maintains itself to the level that we know, so that we know we can survive. Again, it's not about the ocean, it's about us at the end of the day, right? So, and even that we're not really sure. It should be 50%. The logic will tell us it should be 50%. I always do this like weird metaphorical concept. Imagine that you plan your own house, right? And you design your house and you say, I'm gonna have 90% of the surface is kitchen. It's gonna be a very shitty house, right? It doesn't make sense. But so that you start dividing and say, no, I also need a living room, I just need a bathroom, right? Right. This is what we're doing now with the ocean. Everything is kitchen, and we are extracting everything, and this also on land is also true. So nothing about this is logical, and we are penalized. So the 30 by 30 target is saying at least we should already put 30% under protection, but it doesn't still specify about the full protection, even if the vast majority of researcher agrees that food protection is the only one that really works. But yeah, unfortunately, there are all these social aspects. For example, colonial countries, countries that used to have colonies like France, UK, US, have most of their marine protected areas in territories that are not their own one. Like, for example, Polynesia, right? Africa, islands scattered in the Pacific, that you said, is that France, right? But if you look at the map of the economic exclusion zone of France, it's huge. It's one of the biggest one in the world. And so, but they're protecting the things that are outside from the constituency, because again, at the end of the day, the problem is political. And it's a political game that we should start playing more.
Yeah. So basically the power that I have as a listener is, like in so many other cases, write to my local politicians that I support 30 by 2030, or is there any other tip that you would have? I mean, actually, I would like to touch on that topic again in a second, but is there anything that I as a consumer can do besides asking my politicians to do something for me?
Well, I think you're doing something that is already very important, that is having a venue of bringing people together and informing them on very different topics. And I think that the first step is being informed in many things, because many people don't act because, of course, they don't know. Nobody knows about everything. And so knowledge is the first thing. And then I think that there are many ways you can support this, and politically, that is one, is paying more attention to the main decisions that are not most told or discussed by the media, and the power that the lobbies have in our politicians, and understanding the game, because it's not also that all politicians are bad. That's not either that. Even there are some bad politicians. Again, it's not that everyone is like there to try to destroy the world. But if the constituency of the people that is caring about this is not doing politics, then they think that they are representing the willing of the people, because the only voice is the one from the extractive industries. And in one of our project that is called Atlas Aquatica, we are working with the diving communities, so diving centers all over the world, where we are trying to empower them and start them to create cooperatives, because diving centers are like small size businesses, usually with easygoing people, right? That didn't do surf, but they went dive. So it's like the same vibe. And within that vibe they're not really necessarily like the best business people or magnates. They don't see themselves as an industry. But we demonstrated that actually diving in Mexico is generating more money than fishing over the diving sites. So that means that even they combined, all these small size businesses are actually very important. And so we can take that, and if we can organize the sector, it could be a powerful sector that can help.
All the best for your future, Fabio. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me anytime. I would love to also speak in any other topic, and thank you for your podcast. And I also hope that this is going to be huge.
Yeah, I bet there will be an episode 2 of this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Where the ocean meets.